is a springtime rain, to have a friend right in your corner. Your heart will feel a little warmer. Tender loving care, tender loving care. Each warm and friendly touch lets someone know you care so much. Tender loving care, tender loving care.
Hi, I'm Dr. Greenbrier Almond. Thank you for joining us on our program, Tender Loving Care. This week we're at Artistry on Main, and I have a guest that has been on our program, Tender Loving Care, in the past. Phyllis Coston is well known in our community, but we're going to introduce her to you again today. But I just want to say she helped me in one special way when President Kennedy was President of the United States. This is a long time ago. I was in a junior high. Phyllis taught a class in the summer about speed reading.
That's right.
President Kennedy was a speed reader, and I wanted to be a speed reader like him, and I believe he could get up to 1,200 or 1,300 words a minute, and at least with those machines I did that summer.
Right.
So thank you.
Very well, that's right.
I succeeded at something, and that sparked me to succeed in other ways.
All right, good. Well, I've told people when I came to Buchanan, I became the Evelyn Wood of Buchanan our first couple of years. But then I felt that it was very important for people to learn that some books are to be tasted, which you do when you speed read, and others chewed and digested.
Okay.
And certainly on the college level, we need to chew and digest them. And it was actually 63, and we just came in time in 62, when I started what then was called the Reading and Study Development Center, and offered a non-credit course, which after a few years became for credit. Now, people were afraid at first, oh, a course like this must be for students who need a lot of help, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
I had it was for both.
Yes.
I had
well, we were
about
convinced that
half of the kids on it were in the dean's list.
Right. I was convinced that you could not read everything that had to be read unless you could read faster.
Yes. So for some, I worked on the speed reading. Like you were a very strong student. For others, they had to learn how to do study methods. But even very good students need to have ways to study because that's how you become better. I was privileged just 2 years ago when a man who had been president of Asbury Seminary told me that that course was the best course he took, that he in college and seminary, because he learned how to study. And I really recommend that people, when they go to college, learn, or high school if it's offered there, learn how to study. I have a saying on my wall, it's in the office, it's not the time you put in, but what you put in the hours. Not the hours you put in, but what you put in the hours.
Your hours, yeah.
Yes.
That's a good saying, because we all have, as the saying is, 24 hours a day, and some people obviously are more successful with their life, and others are not as successful, but it's what you put into those hours.
Yes, and there are tips that allow you to read. You read faster. People don't want a preview, and that preview, view before. But it's been proven by all kinds of tests that if you preview a chapter, that is, skim it, read the title, the headings, and so forth, and the introduction and summary, your comprehension on that chapter will improve by 70%.
Wow.
And that's a big percentage.
That is. That's
and
huge.
then because you know something about it, you do read it faster. You're not speed reading it, but you still read it faster because you're not stopping to say, what did he say? And there are times, though, when you do need to stop and say, what did he say? You need to reflect. There's all kinds of tips in reading that make for success.
Right.
One of the worst ways to read is though just to pick up a chapter and say, I'm reading it to get
Well, we're going to
get done with it.
As we talk about your book, this is called Celebration of Success by Phyllis Coston. Has a wonderful picture of Wesleyan on the cover with the fountain that took years and years for us to ever have at Wesleyan, though it was in our alma mater in the song.
Magic, mystic fountain.
Yes, where dreams of life began.
And you know, sometimes when I walk to work, I look at that and I say that in my mind.
Yeah.
Because I did have dreams that
began here at Wesleyan.
We began here.
And we're at Artistry on Main today. This is the second phase of growth for Artistry on Main. Since April of 2014, we've been open every day of the year except for Christmas and Easter. And Phyllis and myself and the 36 other artists, there's 38 of us, take turns and cover the shop. And we also have writing workshops, painting workshops, various workshops here in the back, a studio workshop area. And so we're very excited to be here. And Phyllis, your book is not only for sale here, but it's for sale other places too. Yes,
but this is one of the best places in Buchanan.
Yes.
So I want to share it because we lack bookstores in Buchanan, except we have one. Wesleyan is now calling what previously you know it as Wesleyan's bookstore, as I think it's called temporarily a retail store, but they're having a contest on what to name it.
Okay.
So you can get it in the SCAL at Wesleyan, the Social Center of Wesleyan, and I really recommend either of these places, but try to buy it here locally, although you can get it on Amazon.com.
Okay.
And at Barnes & Noble, but I've been told that you have to wait longer at Barnes & Noble because they have to send to the company and it takes a little longer. If you're sending for it, I'd think Amazon is a little quicker, but it depends how you want to buy it.
But we're talking about this in July this year of 2014, and he wants to read this summer. And I would say there's different people who would be interested in this. What percentage of children may have learning disabilities of some kind?
I don't know the exact percentage.
It's a small percentage.
High. It is quite high.
Quite high, okay.
Quite high.
So a parent may realize that they have a smart child, or grandparent may realize that, but the child has not caught on like they should. And it could be that they need a diagnosis, need a workup, and then they need a program like you offered.
That's right. And the sooner the better. The sooner you get, the success can be the sooner the child gets to know and accept it. Now, you have helped people a lot, Greenbrier, in your psychology practice of people who have to go through grieving. And you know there are the steps of the grieving process. Right. These steps are similar to people who discover they have a learning disability. They start with anger, which is...
Why me? What a horrible thing.
Right. Yes. And then they go on and they finally get on, go over, I can't think of the steps right now. The anger, and what is the next?
Well, you go into denial.
Denial.
You can say this is not true, and people will fight against it.
And they do that, and then they get to recognition. Now, most of the students who are in this book came to recognition. Now, most of the students who come to Wesleyan and other places, and who will say to you, I'm dyslexic, or I have traumatic brain injury, or something like that, recognize it. But there's one step further that's needed for real success. And you could guess that, I think, when you're, as a doctor, they need acceptance. Once they can find they accept them. One of the things I did at Wesleyan was give them just 12 hours to begin. Now that's a legitimate full-time schedule, but but if they could succeed, the sky was the limit. You need to have that first semester in college successful, and to have the work, to learn how to study, and to balance your courses with those that you're interested in and the required ones.
Let me tell you, I told a child just recently, the sky's the limit, just what you said. I was trying to tell them they can succeed in life, and they said, well, doctor, he said, you know, man has walked on the moon. The sky is not the limit. The moon is the limit, or wherever it is, you know. And I thought, wow, there's a bright child. You know, they were thinking, they were receiving what I was saying. Let me kibitz off another part of what you said, Phyllis. Acceptance. Benjamin Franklin, who I admire greatly, and I recommend to people the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin as one of our leaders developing our country, and he wrote about creativity. He wrote about thinking about something new every day. But he said about acceptance, he said, if you want to succeed in life, when you're young, develop a chronic disease and then take care of it. So it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, it could be a learning disability.
It really could.
And then if you master that, take care of that, you are on your way to success.
And what I find, and I use the term, and I know some people argued with me, they didn't like the term, but most of the students have even called me or written me, and most that I interviewed said how they liked it when I used the term, it's not a disability, it's a learning difference.
Okay, yes.
Because you don't have to make it a disability.
No.
And one of these the young men in this book, Evan Tracy, has even been on television during political campaigns. He worked for some of the big companies, and he was on the newscast because he helped interpret the news about the politics. He's been in many jobs, and he's taught at universities. He's done many things, but he never thinks it is a disability. He said he always, and he said it made him think out of the box.
Yeah.
And successful people usually do think out of the box.
I had a young man who's, this is haymaking season in West Virginia right now, and we were talking together, and I said, well, are you going to be making hay? He said, oh, no, doctor, I'm disabled. I said, what do you mean you're disabled? He says, well, I never learned how to read or write. I have a learning disability. And I said, well, you may feel that way, but it's not a physical disability, and you can overcome the learning part and certainly get outside and make hay.
Make hay.
Make hay while the sun shines.
Did he do that?
I hope he did. I don't know. I'll have to check on that.
That would be good to do. One of the things, that I was just looking at as I was waiting for you, and thought of this. I have a web page that is called Get to It by Celebration of Success. So
okay, Celebration of Success, which is
and on it every day, I was asked to list a tip. And I've been listing in the last month tips from the book. Because at the end of most of the chapters, students listed a tip to give to others.
Very practical.
And like this one I just opened here, don't let fear control your actions.
Okay.
Persevere. When you are fearful that you can't do something, make it your goal to do it. Obviously, this person was anxious. And one of the reasons, this is a young man who is a lawyer today, and when I asked him what his worst experience was with he's dyslexic, having dyslexia, he said hearing in first grade he heard his teacher say to his mother, he's the dumbest kid in the class and he will never succeed.
Wow.
He graduated one of the top students, I think it was 4th in his law school class. The teacher was wrong.
Right.
His mother didn't believe it. And his grandfather, by the way, as a grandfather, you enjoy your grandchildren. Grandfather did a lot to make him accept himself, we were talking about. And the mother took him for special testing in New York, and she was able to provide special doctors for him. But he did succeed, and he never read well at first, and he used recorded textbooks. And then he got them from the library of recorded books, and his eyes got interested in reading through his ears, which was his strongest modality.
Yeah.
Which was...
I'll mention a success that, not in your book, but when I went to medical school at West Virginia University, our favorite professor, we named him Professor of the Year one year, was William Sabota. And his wife Lois and he were both doctors. He taught us about dyslexia and about learning problems and learning issues. He was a pediatrician, he was a neurologist, And then he had yet another specialty in the combination, pediatric neurology. So he had adult and adolescent and child neurology and pediatrics. So he had more specialties than practically anyone else at our medical center. And yet, he had never learned how to read.
Isn't that interesting?
And when he would lecture, the lectures were most entertaining. He would use cartoon figures, stick men, really. But he would have them with facial expression, or the stick might portray movement of the arm or leg. I mean, he was an expert cartoonist.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
so he could put up a little cartoon, and then he'd talk about that for 10 minutes, and put another cartoon up. And but he never learned to read. But he learned a couple of things he learned about how to succeed. He would always sit on the front row of the class.
I used to
and
tell
listen,
students to
and listen.
do that.
He would record the lecture, and then he had the common sense to marry his wife, who actually could read and so forth. And so when they got into medical text and things like this, she would read the text. He would hear what she read. But he was brilliant. He was brilliant, and not at all dumb.
I work with people like that.
Yeah.
And that's...
It's a mystery why he could not read, but he couldn't.
But here's something so simple: never give up.
Never give up.
The word can't should not be in your vocabulary. That's written by a young girl who taught autistic children for 10 years. She had such a struggle in school, and yet the teachers wouldn't believe it. She was smart, and they didn't want her, give her extra help. They said, you're just average. And her parents went, and they said, no, she doesn't need any special help. She's all right. She's a girl. She doesn't need to go to college, which was, of course, bad. But she wanted to teach, and she did teach. And for 10 years, she worked with autistic children. She took them as preschoolers, and most of them couldn't talk. By the time they were ready for first grade, and I think she has a 100% success story, they all were able to talk and go into first grade. And that's great.
Yeah, and this is to highlight this is what Phyllis Coston's book is all about: celebration of success. And we are at Artistry on Main today, Phyllis and I talking, and we thank Rodney Irwin and Channel 3 for this opportunity to be here today. And we thank, of course, the leaders of this Artistry on Main who have put this together. 38 artists represented here, including Phyllis and myself. We're the authors here in the enterprise, and we're open every day of the year except Christmas and Easter. On Sundays it's from noon to 6. Other days 10 o'clock till 6. Right downtown, right across from the Dairy Queen, and Artistry on Main. And Phyllis, celebration of success. You have probably seen, just like you said with this young lady, she overcame her learning issues, and now she teaches in the hardest area possible. I mean, you cannot imagine. I ask, if I went to the school board, as I'm on the school board, and I ask the 400 teachers under us, I'd say, what is the hardest area to teach? They would say, oh, the autistic child.
Right. She did it 10 years. Now, she recently decided she needed to go back into a main classroom just to get refreshed herself, because she said there's she was afraid of burning out, and she didn't want to. Now, she'll go back to, she has a real gift. She's gifted to work with the autistic child, and they loved her. And that mentions teachers. I found in working with students, there are two types of teachers that changed these kids' lives. There was the very good teacher, and many of them had that teacher who said to them, you can do it. And who even had ways to allow them to succeed without making them feel different in a classroom. I can remember one young man saying how good it was to be in this teacher's class. She would say to him, she would just come up and maybe talk to him alone, Greenborough, you only need to do 10 of the 15. Now, he was a slow reader, but he'd do those 10, not get frustrated, and he'd succeed.
Wow.
And her philosophy is you can do 10, you can do 15.
Sure.
And knowing this made him not feel different or frustrated. Oh, I'm not getting done, everybody's looking at me, I'm the slowest.
Right.
That teacher had good technique. And the main thing is the word I used before, the teachers accepted them. They built on strengths and not weaknesses, which was my whole philosophy in teaching myself. Accept the student where he is. I built the Learning Center interesting on 3 words that I had a Christian ed professor use a lot at Wesleyan. That was Miss Nellie Wilson. People remembered her as a dean
That's
of
how
women.
I remember her,
but
yes.
she was an excellent teacher.
My
I
goodness.
think she was as fine as Glauner and Bryan and Crispin that you heard.
Absolutely.
And people didn't know that.
No, I didn't know that.
But only those of us who happen to have Christian education, which were small classes. But she emphasized interest, needs, and capacities. And I tend to use the word needs and capacities. I often use words abilities instead of capacities. And that's what I built the Learning Center on. An interest. And if you want to learn to read, get something that interests you. Get something that's on your reading level, your ability level, that you have the ability to do. And it's something you need to find out about. Interest, needs, and capacity. What are your needs?
And you are saying something else. I mean, there's 2 things. Phyllis is so wise. I'm so glad you're my Sunday school teacher at the First United Methodist Church. So it's a multi-dimensional relationship we have. But you are a person of faith. And so the teachers you're describing who succeeded had faith in their students. But you instill faith, don't you? I mean, you're an example of faith yourself.
I try to. You do it with the way you live. You don't talk it.
Right.
And as St. Francis says...
There's no magic word for faith. In other words,
that's right.
I don't need to say hallelujah. It's fine to say it, but that's not a magic word for faith. You have to live it.
No. St. Francis said, preach every day, and some days you use words.
Okay.
And I have always liked that. It's the way you live.
Right. You came to Wesleyan, and we should say something about Wesleyan's role too here. In the midst of our community, Wesleyan was very instrumental in Artistry on Main succeeding. When the idea was proposed, they got behind it 100% and said, yes, we want artists in our community. We want them on Main Street. We want the original grants that helped us get started to be approved. So Wesleyan stands behind a lot of really good, solid things in our community, including, of course, your Learning Center and offering education to students who otherwise would not have had a college education.
Yes. And I think Wesleyan helped other schools. I was a pioneer in starting the program in the 82 for students with dyslexia, and then developed other learning. And I was asked to speak all over the country to help other students.
Wow.
And Wesleyan supported that by paying my plane fare to go to these places to speak. And but I got these invitations. Sometimes they paid for them, and other times the college did. But it was important.
Yeah. Well, there's no small minds. There's no mind to waste. I mean, we live in an age now where everyone needs to be educated and skilled, and there's no throwaway people. I mean, we could argue that say 150 years ago, some people could make a living by the strength of their back, and that was probably true to a point. But they would have been a better citizen if they were educated. I mean, education is the ticket, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I hope we don't have many teachers today like some of the teachers were in this book. Many of the students that I worked with in the book were they were in school before people really would believe there was dyslexia. There were years when people said they were just lazy or dumb.
I know.
And so many of these students were called by teachers lazy or dumb. One girl talks about having to sit in the hall. She was in 2nd grade and she has what we know now as ADHD, which wasn't even thought of then.
No.
And anyone who has a child who has ADHD knows they are all over the place. They're active, they're hard to control. And the teacher finally had her sit out in the hall all day in 2nd grade. She spent most of her days sitting in the hall. Today, this wouldn't be allowed. Parents would go to the school or the school board, and that wouldn't be allowed. But she spent all her day there and felt she was just worthless. She is an owner of a company today.
My goodness.
And arranged a trucking company. It was interesting. But has worked and does a lot of volunteer work to help people. It's very interesting.
Well, we've come a long way in education, and you're an example of that too. And in the closing minutes, I want to just emphasize that Phyllis has a sense of mission, not only in your teaching and your service, but in writing this book.
You're right.
And and you would have to say other things you've overcome. A woman to be educated as you have been, to pioneer. I mean, we used to throw away women, didn't we? They couldn't vote. They couldn't.
Well,
I couldn't teach.
When I was at Wesleyan, and I graduated in '53, and I was called in by the district superintendent of the Methodist Church because I had a local preacher's license, and then it just allowed you to preach different places. I had been asked because I was a Christian ed major and an education major at Wesleyan. And this DS called me in, and he made me feel like God's gift to Buchanan. And I was so thrilled until he told me, go into some other profession. The Methodist Church will never ordain you.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, why? And he said, because you're a woman.
Oh my goodness.
But Wesleyan's president at that time, William Scarborough, called me in also and said, there are two people from this class that I want to come back to Wesleyan, and that's you and Orlo Strunk. And interesting enough, we did come back.
Both came back, yeah.
And I know now that my gift to teaching, even though I love to preach and do so today, was the important thing. I'm better. I was better, and God called me. I was better to write this book and to work with LD students than I would have been to preach in Podunk.
Well, we're certainly glad that you did that and you followed God's calling. And let us emphasize one more time, because Celebration of Success is worth reading. If you're a parent, a grandparent, you have a child, a grandchild that you feel is struggling in some way, this is a good beginning, because the tips will be practical. It'll be a beginning. You can go on to your school, get other help, of course. But Celebration of Success, Phyllis Coston, here for sale, Artistry on Main, at the Wesleyan Bookstore or Wesleyan Retail Store, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, and other places.
I do urge them to come here. Many people, we haven't sold many here because I don't think people expect an artistry book to have books in them. They expect the artwork. So I urge people to come. And it's not the kind of book you have to read cover to cover. You could read a story at a time.
That's how I'm reading it. I'm reading one or two or three stories at a time, and then next night I pick up 2 or 3 more stories. And so it's a good read. Let me say this too as we close, and we can say this together. We have the Artistry on Main is right here on Main Street in Buchanan, West Virginia. We're open every day of the year except Christmas and Easter. We're open on Sundays from
noon to 6.
Noon till 6, and then other days throughout the week
10 to 6.
10 till 6. So Artistry on Main, you will find Celebration of Success as a book here. We're one of 38 artists, so thank you very much,
Phyllis, thank you, Greenbrier, for allowing me to share this.
Yeah, and thanks for Channel 3 for this opportunity to come your way each week. We'll look forward to more discussions from Artistry on Main in the future. Take care.
Stories of a West Virginia Doctor, written by Dr. Harold D. Allman. A collection of 55 short stories about his experience as a small-town doctor in central West Virginia. And Tender Loving Care. Stories from a West Virginia Doctor, Volume 2, written by Dr. Greenbrier Allman, using videotapes to write 70 additional stories of his father's very colorful life as a small-town doctor. They can be found for purchase at Amazon.com and most local bookstores. Tune into Channel 3 Buchanan for Tender Loving Care with Dr. Greenbrier Allman, where he talks about the connection between Christianity and medicine.